I take a deep breath as I step out of the car, my hand tightly clasped in Ethan's. The house looms before us, a stark reminder of the years of silence that stretch between Ethan and his father. I squeeze Ethan's hand, offering a reassuring smile. "It's going to be okay," I whisper, though the words feel hollow even to my own ears. Ethan nods, his jaw clenched tight. "Let's just get this over with," he mutters, striding towards the front door. I follow, my heart pounding in my chest as Ethan raises his hand to knock. The door swings open, revealing a man I've only seen in faded photographs. Frank, Ethan's father, stands before us, his face etched with lines of age and bitterness. "Ethan," he says, his voice gruff. "It's been a long time." "Dad," Ethan replies, his tone carefully neutral. "This is Zara, my wife." Frank's gaze shifts to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "A pleasure," he says, though his tone suggests otherwise. We step inside, the house feeling strangely cold despite the warm summer day. Frank leads us to the living room, gesturing for us to sit. I perch on the edge of the couch, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "So," Frank begins, leaning back in his armchair, "what brings you here after all these years?" Ethan clears his throat, his eyes meeting mine briefly before he speaks. "Zara thought it was time we tried to mend things between us. For the sake of family." Frank scoffs, shaking his head. "Family? You haven't been much of a family to me, boy." I bristle at his words, but Ethan remains calm. "I know we've had our differences, Dad, but I'm here now, aren't I?" Frank grunts, his gaze shifting to the window. "I suppose you are." The conversation lulls, the tension thick in the air. I clear my throat, desperate to break the silence. "Ethan tells me you used to work in sales, Frank. What was that like?" Frank's eyes snap back to me, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "It was a job," he says shortly. "Nothing more, nothing less." I nod, sensing that further questions won't be welcomed. We sit in awkward silence for a few more moments before Ethan stands abruptly. "We should get going," he says, his voice strained. "It's a long drive back." Frank nods, rising slowly from his chair. "Don't be a stranger," he says, though his words lack sincerity. We say our goodbyes, the door closing behind us with a heavy thud. As we walk back to the car, I can't shake the feeling that something is off. Frank's demeanor, his cold reception, it all feels wrong somehow. A month later, the phone rings. It's Frank, his voice tinged with desperation. "I need your help," he says, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm sick, and I can't take care of myself anymore. I need to move in with you and Ethan." I freeze, the phone nearly slipping from my grasp. "Move in with us?" After the way he treated Ethan at our visit, I glance at Ethan, seeing the conflicted emotions playing across his face. "We'll have to discuss it," I say finally, my voice trembling slightly. "Can we call you back?" Frank agrees, and I hang up the phone, my mind reeling. I turn to Ethan, my heart sinking at the look of resignation on his face. "He's my father," Ethan says softly. "I can't turn him away." I nod, knowing that Ethan's sense of duty will always win out in the end. But as we begin to make plans for Frank's arrival, I can't shake the feeling that we're making a terrible mistake. The day Frank moves in, I feel a sense of unease that I can't quite shake. Ethan and I help him settle into the guest room, arranging his few belongings and making sure he's comfortable. At first, things seem to be going smoothly. Frank is polite, even charming at times, and I start to think that maybe my initial reservations were unfounded. But as the weeks pass, I begin to notice little things that set off alarm bells in my head. Frank starts making offhand comments about money, hinting at the financial strain he's under. One evening, over dinner, he finally comes out with it. "I hate to ask," he says, his eyes downcast, "but I'm in a bit of a bind. My late wife, she left me with some significant gambling debts. I don't know how I'm going to pay them off." Ethan's fork clatters to his plate, his face etched with concern. "Dad, why didn't you say something sooner? We could have helped." Frank shakes his head, a wry smile on his lips. "I didn't want to be a burden, but now, living here with you, I thought maybe." He trails off, letting the implication hang in the air. I glance at Ethan, seeing the wheels turning in his head. "We can cover the debts," Ethan says finally, "and you can stay here with us, save on living costs. It's the least we can do." I open my mouth to protest, but the words die on my lips. How can I argue with Ethan's generosity, his desire to help his father? So I nod, forcing a smile onto my face. "Of course," I say, "we're family after all." Frank's face breaks into a grin. and he reaches across the table to clasp Ethan's hand. "Thank you, son. You don't know how much this means to me." But as I watch the exchange, I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. There's a glint in Frank's eye, a calculating edge to his smile that makes my skin crawl. The next few weeks are a blur of financial discussions and budget adjustments. Ethan insists on paying off Frank's debts in full, even though it means dipping into our savings. I try to voice my concerns, but Ethan waves them away. "He's my father, Zara," he says, his voice firm. "I can't just turn my back on him." I nod, swallowing my objections. But as the days pass, I start to notice a change in Ethan. He seems distracted, distant, as if he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. One evening, he comes home late from work, his face drawn and tired. I'm in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when he walks in and slumps into a chair. "I quit my job today," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. I nearly drop the spoon I'm holding, my heart leaping into my throat. "What? Why?" Ethan runs a hand through his hair, his eyes meeting mine. "I want to start a nonprofit, Zara. I want to make a difference in the world." I stare at him, my mind reeling. A nonprofit? Now, when we're already stretched thin financially? But before I can voice my concerns, Frank walks into the kitchen, his face twisted into a scowl. "A nonprofit?" he sneers, his voice dripping with disdain. "How are you going to support us on that, boy? You think your little dream is more important than taking care of your family?" Ethan flinches as if he's been slapped, his face flushing with shame. "I just thought—" "You thought wrong," Frank snaps, cutting him off. "You're being selfish, Ethan. You can't afford to chase your dreams when you have responsibilities." I watch as Ethan seems to shrink before my eyes, his shoulders slumping in defeat. And in that moment, I realize the truth. Frank isn't here because he needs our help. He's here to manipulate us, to bleed us dry and break us down, and I'll be damned if I let him get away with it. The days turn into weeks, and Frank's presence in our home becomes increasingly suffocating. He seems to take pleasure in belittling Ethan at every turn, constantly reminding him of the financial strain his nonprofit is putting on our family. I try to shield Ethan from the worst of it, but Frank's words have a way of worming their way into his mind. I watch as my once confident husband starts to doubt himself, his dreams slowly crumbling under the weight of his father's disapproval. One evening, I overhear Frank talking to Ethan in the living room. His voice is loud, carrying easily through the thin walls. "You're a failure, Ethan," he says, his tone dripping with contempt. "You think you can change the world with your little nonprofit? You can't even take care of your own family." I feel a surge of anger rising in my chest, and I storm into the room, my eyes blazing. "That's enough, Frank," I snap, my voice trembling with rage. "You have no right to speak to Ethan that way." Frank turns to me, his face twisted into a sneer. "Stay out of this, Zara. This is between me and my son." But I refuse to back down. "Ethan is my husband," I say, my voice growing stronger with each word, "and I won't let you tear him down like this." Frank scoffs, shaking his head. "You don't understand, girl. I'm trying to help him, to make him see the error of his ways." I laugh, the sound harsh and bitter. "Help him? By crushing his dreams and making him feel worthless? That's not help, Frank. That's abuse." Ethan looks up at me, his eyes wide with surprise. I can see the gratitude in his gaze, the relief at having someone stand up for him. But Frank isn't finished. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Zara?" he says, his voice low and menacing. "You think you know what's best for Ethan? Well, let me tell you something. I'm his father, and I know what's best for him. And what's best is for him to give up this foolish dream and focus on taking care of his family." I shake my head, my heart breaking for Ethan. "You're wrong, Frank. Ethan's dream is what makes him who he is. It's what drives him, what gives him purpose, and I won't let you take that away from him." Frank's face darkens, and for a moment, I think he might lash out at me, but instead he turns and stalks out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I turn to Ethan, my heart aching at the defeated slump of his shoulders. "I'm so sorry," I whisper, pulling him into my arms. "I'm sorry you have to deal with this." Ethan clings to me, his body shaking with silent sobs. "I don't know what to do, Zara," he says, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "I feel like I'm being pulled in 1,000 different directions." I stroke his hair, my mind racing with possibilities, and then, suddenly, it hits me. The pieces fall into place, and I realize the truth of what's been happening. Ethan, I say, pulling back to look him in the eye, I think your father is manipulating us. I think he's been planning this from the start. Ethan frowns, his brow furrowing in confusion. What do you mean? I take a deep breath, my mind whirling with the implications of what I'm about to say. Think about it. He shows up out of nowhere, asking for money and a place to stay. He guilt-trips you into quitting your job and starting a nonprofit, knowing it will put a strain on our finances. And now he's constantly belittling you, making you feel like a failure. Ethan's eyes widen, and I can see the realization dawning on his face. You're right, he says, his voice barely above a whisper. But why? Why would he do this? I shake my head, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what we're up against. I don't know, I say, but I intend to find out. The next day, I wait until Ethan leaves for work before confronting Frank. I find him in the living room, lounging in his armchair with a newspaper in his lap. We need to talk, I say, my voice tight with anger. Frank looks up at me, his eyes narrowing. About what? I take a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation to come. I know what you're doing, Frank. I know you're manipulating Ethan, trying to bleed us dry. Frank's face hardens, and he sets the newspaper aside. I don't know what you're talking about, Zara. I'm just a concerned father, trying to look out for my son. I shake my head, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. No, you're not. You're a liar and a manipulator, and I won't let you get away with it. Frank stands up, his face twisting into a sneer. You don't know anything, girl. You think you can come into my family and start making accusations? You have no idea what you're talking about. I stand my ground, refusing to be intimidated. I know more than you think, Frank. I know about your debts, about how you've been using Ethan to pay them off. Frank's eyes widen, and for a moment I see a flicker of fear cross his face, but then his expression hardens, and he takes a step towards me. You think you're so clever, don't you, Zara? He says, his voice low and menacing. You think you've got it all figured out. Well, let me tell you something. You're right, I am in debt. But it's not from gambling. It's from failed business ventures, investments that went south. I stare at him, my mind reeling with the implications of his words. So, you've been using Ethan to bail you out? To pay off your mistakes? Frank shrugs, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. What can I say? The boy owes me. I raised him, put a roof over his head. The least he can do is help his old man out in his time of need. I feel a surge of disgust rising in my throat, and I have to fight the urge to slap the smug look off his face. You're despicable, I spit, my voice trembling with rage. You're taking advantage of Ethan's love for you, his sense of duty. You're destroying him, piece by piece. Frank laughs, the sound harsh and grating. Destroying him? Please. I'm making him stronger, teaching him the realities of life, and if he can't handle it, well, that's his problem. I shake my head, my heart breaking for Ethan. You're wrong, Frank. Ethan is one of the strongest people I know, and he doesn't need you, not anymore. Frank's face darkens, and he takes another step towards me. You think you can turn him against me? You think you can take my son away from me? I stand my ground, my chin lifted in defiance. I'm not taking him away from you, Frank. You're doing that yourself, with your lies and your manipulations. Frank's hand twitches at his side, and for a moment I think he might strike me. But instead, he turns away, his shoulders slumping in defeat. You don't understand, Zara, he says, his voice barely above a whisper. I have a plan, a way to get out of this mess. I was going to sell the house, force you and Ethan out. I even turned his sister against you, convinced her to take my side. I stare at him, my mind reeling with the depths of his betrayal. You monster, I whisper, my voice trembling with emotion. You would destroy your own family just to save yourself? Frank turns back to me, his face a mask of desperation. I have no choice, Zara. I'm drowning in debt, and I need a way out. I shake my head, my resolve hardening. No, Frank, you do have a choice. You can face the consequences of your actions like a man. You can tell Ethan the truth and beg for his forgiveness. Frank's face twists into a sneer, and he turns away from me. I won't do that, Zara. I can't. I nod, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what I must do. Then I will, Frank. I'll tell Ethan everything, and we'll see how he reacts. But one thing is for sure. You won't be staying in this house any longer. Not if I have anything to say about it. The next few days are a blur of activity. I know I need to act fast, to gather evidence of Frank's betrayal before he has a chance to put his plan into action. I start by secretly recording our conversations, hiding my phone in my pocket and letting it capture every vile word that spills from Frank's lips. He talks about his debts, about his plans to sell the house and leave us with nothing. He even brags about turning Olivia against us, convincing her that we're the enemy. It's sickening to listen to, but I force myself to keep going, to gather as much evidence as I can. I know I'll need it if I'm going to convince Ethan of the truth. Finally, after days of recording, I have what I need. I wait until Ethan gets home from work, then pull him aside, my heart pounding in my chest. "There's something you need to hear," I say, my voice trembling with emotion. I play the recordings for him, watching as his face goes from confusion to shock to anger. He listens in silence, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. When the last recording ends, he looks up at me, his eyes blazing with fury. "I can't believe it," he whispers, his voice hoarse with emotion. "My own father betraying me like this." I nod, my heart breaking for him. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I know how much you love him, how much you wanted to believe in him." Ethan shakes his head, his jaw clenched tight. "No, Zara, you were right all along. He's been using me, manipulating me, and I let him do it." I reach out and take his hand, squeezing it gently. "It's not your fault, Ethan. He's your father, and you wanted to believe the best of him. But now we need to focus on protecting ourselves, on getting away from him before he can hurt us anymore." Ethan nods, his eyes hardening with resolve. "You're right. We need to sell the house, move out before he realizes what's happening." We spend the next few days in a flurry of activity, contacting real estate agents and packing up our belongings. We work in secret, but I was careful not to let Frank catch on to our plans. Finally, the day arrives. We found a buyer for the house, and everything is in place for us to move out. I wait until Frank leaves for one of his mysterious errands, then call Olivia, my hands shaking as I dial her number. "Olivia, it's Zara," I say when she answers. "There's something you need to hear." I play the recordings for her, my heart pounding as I wait for her reaction. At first, there's only silence on the other end of the line. Then I hear a sharp intake of breath, followed by a string of curses. "That bastard," Olivia says, her voice trembling with anger. "I can't believe I let him manipulate me like that." I feel a surge of relief wash over me, and I let out a shaky breath. "It's not your fault, Olivia. He's good at what he does. But now we need to stand together to make sure he can't hurt anyone else." Olivia agrees, and we spend the next hour plotting our next move. By the time we hang up, I feel a sense of hope stirring in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, we can come out of this stronger than ever. The next day, Ethan and I load the last of our belongings into the moving truck and drive away from the house that has caused us so much pain. As we pull out of the driveway, I catch a glimpse of Frank's face in the rearview mirror. He looks shocked, angry, and maybe even a little afraid. But I don't let myself feel sorry for him. He made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. And as for Ethan and me, we have a whole new life ahead of us, one free from lies and manipulation. And I know deep in my heart that we're going to be just fine. We're barely settled into our new apartment when the phone rings. It's Frank, his voice tight with anger. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Ethan?" he shouts, his words slurring together. "You can't just sell the house and leave me with nowhere to go." Ethan takes a deep breath, his hand clenching the phone so tightly his knuckles turn white. "It's done, Dad. The house is sold, and we're not coming back." Frank lets out a string of curses, his voice rising with each word. "You ungrateful little bastard. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" I see the pain flash across Ethan's face, and I reach out to take his hand, squeezing it gently. He looks at me, his eyes filled with gratitude, and turns back to the phone. "You haven't done anything for me, Dad. You've been using me, manipulating me for your own gain, and I'm done letting you control my life." Frank scoffs, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Ethan? You think you can just walk away from me? From your family?" Ethan's jaw clenches, and I can see the anger building in his eyes. "You're not my family, Dad. Not anymore. A real family doesn't lie and cheat and steal from each other." There's a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I think Frank might have hung up. But then his voice comes through the speaker, low and menacing. "You'll regret this, Ethan. You and that bitch wife of yours. You think you can just walk away from me? You have no idea what I'm capable of." I feel a chill run down my spine at his words, but Ethan doesn't flinch. "I know exactly what you're capable of, Dad. And that's why we're walking away. You can't hurt us anymore." He hangs up the phone, his hand trembling slightly as he sets it down on the table. I wrap my arms around him, holding him close as he takes a shuddering breath. "I'm so proud of you," I whisper, my voice thick with emotion. "You did the right thing, Ethan. You stood up to him, and you won." Ethan nods, his eyes filling with tears. "I couldn't have done it without you, Zara. You gave me the strength to fight back, to take control of my life." I smile, brushing a tear from his cheek. "We did it together, Ethan, and we'll keep doing it together, no matter what comes our way." The next few days are tense, as we wait for Frank to make his next move. But as the weeks pass and nothing happens, we start to relax, to settle into our new life. And then, one day, there's a knock at the door. I open it to find Olivia standing there, her face streaked with tears. "I'm so sorry, Zara," she whispers, her voice trembling. "I should have believed you from the start. I should have known that Dad was lying to me." I pull her into a hug, my own eyes filling with tears. "It's okay, Olivia, you're here now, and that's all that matters." We spend the next few hours talking, catching up on all the time we've lost. Olivia tells us about her own struggles with Frank, about how he's been trying to turn her against us for years. "But I see the truth now," she says, her voice filled with determination, "and I'm not going to let him control me anymore. I'm done being his pawn." Ethan nods, his eyes shining with pride. "We're in this together, Olivia. All of us. We'll stand up to him, and we'll win." As the sun sets outside our window, I feel a sense of peace wash over me. We've been through so much, Ethan and I, but we've come out stronger on the other side. And with Olivia by our side, I know that nothing can stop us now. We're a family, a real family, and we'll face whatever comes our way together. A few days later, we get another call from Frank. This time it's Olivia he's after, his voice desperate and pleading. "Olivia, sweetheart, you have to help me," he begs, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm in trouble, and I need a place to stay. You're my only hope." Olivia's face hardens, and she grips the phone tighter. "No, Dad, I'm not going to help you. Not after everything you've done." Frank's voice rises, his anger palpable even through the phone. "You ungrateful little brat. I raised you. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me?" Olivia takes a deep breath, her eyes flashing with determination. "You didn't give me anything, Dad. You took from me, you manipulated me, you tried to turn me against my own brother, and I'm done letting you control my life." There's a long pause, and then Frank's voice comes through the speaker, low and menacing. "You'll regret this, Olivia. You and your brother and that bitch wife of his. You think you can just turn your back on me? You have no idea what I'm capable of." But Olivia doesn't flinch. "I know exactly what you're capable of, Dad, and that's why I'm saying no. You can't hurt me anymore, and you can't hurt Ethan and Zara either. We're done with you." She hangs up the phone, her hand shaking slightly as she sets it down. Ethan wraps an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I'm so proud of you, Olivia," he says, his voice thick with emotion. "You did the right thing." Olivia nods, leaning into his embrace. "I couldn't have done it without you and Zara. You showed me what real love looks like, what a real family is supposed to be." I feel my own eyes fill with tears as I watch them, my heart swelling with love and pride. We've been through so much together, the three of us, but we've come out stronger on the other side. The next day, Ethan and I make a decision. We're going to use the money from the sale of the house to pay off Frank's debts, to free ourselves from his grip once and for all. We contact his creditors, explaining the situation and offering to settle his debts in full. It's not easy and it takes a big chunk out of our savings, but in the end, it's worth it. We meet with Frank one last time in a neutral location with Olivia by our side. He looks haggard, his eyes bloodshot and his clothes rumpled. "What do you want?" he asks, his voice hoarse and defeated. Ethan steps forward, his chin held high. "We're here to tell you that your debts have been paid, Dad. You're free and clear." Frank's eyes widen, and for a moment, I see a flicker of hope cross his face. But then, his expression hardens and he narrows his eyes. "What's the catch?" he asks, his voice dripping with suspicion. I step forward, my own voice steady and clear. There is no catch, Frank. We paid off your debts because we wanted to be free of you, once and for all. But that freedom comes at a price. You're on your own now, and you'll have to find your own way in the world. Frank's face crumples, and for a moment, I almost feel sorry for him. But then I remember all the pain he's caused, all the lies he's told, and my sympathy vanishes. You can't do this to me, he whispers, his voice breaking. I'm your father, Ethan. You can't just abandon me. Ethan shakes his head, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. You stopped being my father the moment you chose to lie to me, to manipulate me for your own gain. And now you have to face the consequences of your actions. We turn to leave, our hearts heavy but our heads held high. As we walk away, I hear Frank's voice behind us, a broken whisper that tears at my heart. I'm sorry, he says, his words barely audible. I'm so sorry. But it's too late for apologies, too late for forgiveness. We've made our choice, and we're not looking back. Months pass, and life goes on. Ethan and I settle into our new routine, our new life together. His nonprofit takes off, and I watch with pride as he pours his heart and soul into making a difference in the world. Olivia becomes a regular fixture in our lives, stopping by for dinner and movie nights, her laughter filling our home with warmth and joy. It's like we've always been this way, a family bound by love and trust, not by blood or obligation. But even as we move forward, the shadow of Frank still lingers. Ethan tries to hide it, but I can see the pain in his eyes whenever his father's name is mentioned, the guilt that still weighs heavy on his heart. One day, I come home from work to find Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. I rush to his side, my heart pounding with worry. What's wrong? I ask, my voice trembling. Is it your dad? Did something happen? Ethan looks up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot. I talked to Olivia today. She said Dad's not doing well. He's living in some run-down apartment, barely getting by on Social Security. She thinks we should reach out to him, try to make amends. I feel a flare of anger at the mention of Frank, but I push it down, focusing on Ethan's pain. What do you want to do? I ask, my voice gentle. Ethan shakes his head, his eyes filling with tears. I don't know, Zara. Part of me wants to help him, to be the bigger person, but another part of me is still so angry, so hurt by what he did. I don't know if I can forgive him. I take his hand in mine, squeezing it gently. You don't have to forgive him, Ethan. What he did to you, to us, is unforgivable. But maybe you can find a way to let go of the anger, to move on with your life. Ethan nods, his jaw clenching with determination. You're right. I need to let go, to focus on the future, not the past. We decide to reach out to Frank, to offer him a small monthly stipend to help with his expenses. It's not much, but it's a start, a way to ease the guilt that still weighs on Ethan's heart. But when we try to contact him, we're met with silence. Calls go unanswered, emails bounce back undeliverable. It's like Frank has disappeared, vanished into thin air. Weeks turn into months, and still, there's no word from him. Olivia tries to track him down, but even she comes up empty-handed. It's like he's gone, a ghost haunting the edges of our lives. And then one day, there's a knock at the door. I open it to find a man standing there, his face lined with age and sorrow. I'm sorry to bother you, he says, his voice hesitant, but I'm looking for Frank Johnson. I'm his landlord, and I haven't seen him in weeks. I was hoping you might know where he is. I feel a chill run down my spine at his words, a sense of dread settling in the pit of my stomach. I'm sorry, I say, my voice shaking. We haven't heard from Frank in months. Is everything okay? The man shakes his head, his eyes filled with pity. I'm afraid not. Frank's apartment was a mess when I went in there. It looks like he hasn't been taking care of himself. I found a bunch of empty bottles, some pills scattered on the floor. I think he might be in trouble. I nod, my heart heavy with sorrow. Thank you for letting us know. We'll do what we can to find him, to get him the help he needs. But even as I say the words, I know it's too late. Frank is gone, lost to his own demons, his own mistakes, and all we can do is pick up the pieces to try to build a life without him. As I close the door, I feel a sense of sadness wash over me. But I also feel a sense of hope, a sense of possibility. We've been through so much, Ethan and I, but we've come out stronger on the other side. And whatever the future holds, I know we'll face it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, because that's what family does. That's what love is all about.
My dad sacrificed my future to favor his friend's son. Now they're paying the price. I never thought I'd be writing this, honestly. It's one of those things where you look back and think, how did I even end up here? But here we are. I'm 28 now, and the older I get, the more I realize how much my past messed me up. Not in a woe is me kind of way, but like, looking back, it's obvious how everything played out. Most of it boils down to one person, my dad. I was born into a situation that wasn't exactly ideal. My mom left right after she had me. Not like she died or anything, but literally packed her stuff and disappeared. No warning, no note, nothing. One day she's in the hospital with me, and the next day gone. No one even knows where she went. And yeah, I've heard all the usual stories about moms being overwhelmed, not ready for kids, or just not in a good mental place, but none of that mattered to me growing up. All I knew was she wasn't there, and somehow that made me the villain in my dad's eyes. From as early as I can remember, my dad had this resentment towards me. It was subtle at first, like he'd just be distant, cold, and pretty much emotionless. As a kid, I didn't get it, but as I got older, I realized it wasn't just that he was cold. He flat out hated me. Why? Because I looked like her. I never knew her, but from the pictures I've seen, the resemblance is uncanny. And I guess every time he looked at me, all he could think about was her walking out on him. That's a hell of a burden to put on a kid, though, right? Growing up in that house felt like walking on eggshells. But the worst part? I never knew what I was doing wrong. I was just being a kid, trying to get by. But to him, I was just a constant reminder of the woman who left. It's not like he was abusive or anything, not in the traditional sense. But the lack of any warmth or affection that messes with you in ways you don't realize until later. I mean, sure, he made sure I was fed and clothed, but that's where the parenting stopped. No "I'm proud of you" moments, no hugs, no "how was your day" talks at the dinner table. It was just emptiness. And then there was Liam. Liam was the son of my dad's best friend. When Liam's dad died in a car accident and his mom ended up in a mental facility, my dad stepped in and took him in. Liam moved into our house when we were both around 7, and let me tell you, that's when everything shifted. You'd think maybe having another kid around would lighten the mood or give me someone to hang out with. But nah, Liam wasn't just some other kid. He was the son my dad always wanted. The way my dad looked at Liam was like night and day compared to me. Liam was everything I wasn't. He was outgoing, confident, athletic, the kind of kid who could charm the pants off of anyone. Meanwhile, I was the quiet, introverted one. I preferred reading and keeping to myself. And in my dad's eyes, I was just a reminder of my mom's betrayal. Liam? He was the golden boy. I didn't stand a chance. I remember so many times where I'd do something I thought was impressive or worth a little attention, but my dad wouldn't even blink. Like one time I spent weeks working on this science project for school. It was a full solar system model that could actually rotate. Pretty cool for a kid, right? I thought, this is it. This will finally get him to notice me. So I came home, excited to show him, but he was sitting on the couch with Liam, watching some football game. I told him about the project, but all I got was a half-hearted nod before he turned back to the TV. It was like I wasn't even there. Meanwhile, Liam could literally do anything and get praise. He could make a half-decent drawing in school, and my dad would hang it on the fridge like it was a masterpiece. The double standards were insane. It wasn't just that he favored Liam, it was that he didn't even try to hide it. I think the worst part wasn't even the obvious favoritism, but the fact that I kept trying. I kept thinking, if I can just do this or that, he'll finally notice me. He'll finally care. But nope, nothing was ever enough. As we got older, it only got worse. Liam and I went to the same school, and even though I did better academically, it didn't matter. Liam was the athlete, the popular one. I was the kid with good grades, but that didn't count for much in my dad's world. He'd say things like, well, grades don't mean everything, or Liam's got bigger things to focus on. It was like nothing I did mattered unless it could be tied to Liam's achievements. He was always the main event, and I was just the opening act no one cared about. I can't tell you how many times I sat in my room, wondering what was wrong with me. Why couldn't I be more like Liam? Why wasn't I enough? But the thing is, it was never about me. I didn't realize it back then, but it was always about him, about my dad's inability to deal with his own crap. He never got over my mom leaving, and instead of dealing with that, he just dumped all that resentment on me. And Liam? I don't even blame him. He was just a kid like me. But the way my dad treated him, he probably thought he was some kind of superhero. And why wouldn't he? My dad made him feel like the center of the universe, while I was just some background character. Looking back now, I can see how messed up the whole situation was. But as a kid, you don't really get that. You just keep trying, hoping that one day things will change. Maybe one day your dad will look at you the way he looks at the other kid. But that day never came for me. And that's how it was for years. Just me, in the shadow of my mom and Liam. It wasn't until much later that I finally realized I had to stop trying to earn something I was never going to get. He was the golden child. My dad acted like Liam was this gift from the universe or something, like he was this perfect son that he'd always wanted. And honestly, it was like I wasn't even there anymore. I'd come home from school and they'd be sitting on the couch laughing and watching TV like I didn't even exist. My dad started doing all this stuff with Liam that he never did with me. They'd go to football games, fishing trips, even camping once. Stuff I never even got asked to do. I remember sitting in my room sometimes, listening to them in the living room, just wondering why I was never included. It's like I wasn't part of the family. But here's the thing. It wasn't just that my dad ignored me. He actively compared me to Liam, like all the time. Why can't you be more like Liam? Liam wouldn't do that. Look at how well Liam handles himself. It was like I was always falling short of some invisible standard that I never even agreed to. Liam was good at sports? Great. That doesn't mean I have to be. But in my dad's eyes, I wasn't allowed to be my own person. If Liam was the athletic, outgoing one, then that's who I was supposed to be too. And the worst part? I tried. I really did. I thought maybe if I tried to be more like Liam, my dad would finally notice me or treat me like I mattered. So I signed up for the basketball team, even though I wasn't really into sports. I figured, if Liam can do it, maybe I can too. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. I wasn't as good as Liam. I wasn't as fast, as strong, or as confident. One time, I actually had a decent game, scored a couple of points, made a few good plays. I came home feeling pretty good about myself, thinking maybe this time my dad would say something. But when I walked through the door, he was already talking to Liam about his game, like mine didn't even happen. I tried to tell him about what I did, but he just said something like, "That's nice," and went right back to his conversation with Liam. It wasn't just sports either. Liam could get a B on a test, and my dad would act like he cured cancer. Meanwhile, I'd be busting my ass to get straight A's, and he'd barely even acknowledge it. I'm not saying I was perfect or anything, but I tried, you know? I tried to make him proud. But no matter what I did, I was always a step behind Liam. And then there was school. We went to the same school, but people treated us completely differently. Liam was the guy. Everyone liked him, teachers included. He was the guy who walked into a room and people noticed. Me? I was just Liam's weird, quiet brother, or the kid with the books. It didn't help that my dad would constantly praise Liam in front of everyone like he was this miracle child. It was like I couldn't escape it, at home or at school. Everywhere I went, Liam was the one people wanted to be around, and I was just there. One day in high school, during a parent-teacher conference, my English teacher told my dad that I'd written one of the best essays she'd ever read. She said I had real talent and that I could be a great writer if I stuck with it. I felt a small surge of hope, like maybe this would be the thing that finally made my dad proud. But nope. My dad barely even looked up from his phone. He asked if it would help me get a scholarship for sports, and then shrugged when the teacher tried to explain that not everything was about sports. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment. It's like my accomplishments didn't even register on his radar unless they were the same kind Liam could achieve. That's how it was for years. No matter how hard I tried, Liam was always the one. I could spend weeks on a project, and my dad wouldn't care. Liam could scribble something on a piece of paper, and my dad would act like it was a masterpiece. It was like living in a shadow all the time, constantly trying to measure up to this person who wasn't even trying. The thing is, I don't even blame Liam for most of it. He was just being himself. He didn't ask for my dad to treat him like a king, and he wasn't going out of his way to make me feel bad. He was just living his life, doing his thing. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I spent so much of my childhood and teenage years wondering why I wasn't good enough, wondering what I had to do to finally get my dad to look at me the way he looked at Liam. It's like I wasn't even a person to him, just a constant reminder of my mom and her betrayal. And maybe that's the heart of it. I think my dad saw me as her. Every time he looked at me, he didn't see me. He saw the woman who walked out on him, the woman who left without a word. And instead of dealing with that pain, he took it out on me. He couldn't be mad at her, so he was mad at me. He couldn't tell her she ruined his life, so he told me that I wasn't good enough. And Liam? Liam was just the perfect distraction from all of it. He was the escape my dad needed from the reality of our situation. Looking back, I can see it now, but at the time, I didn't. I just thought I wasn't good enough. I spent years trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to be more like Liam, because I thought maybe that would make my dad love me. I thought if I could just be better, smarter, stronger, maybe things would change. But they didn't. The thing that sticks with me the most, though, is the fact that I never gave up trying. I kept thinking that one day it would all click, that one day my dad would see me for who I was, not just the kid who looked like his ex, but that day never came. I wish I could say things got better, but the truth is they didn't. Not for a long time. So after years of living in Liam's shadow and feeling like I'd never be good enough, I did what any kid in my situation would probably do. I gave up. I stopped trying to win my dad's approval because it became clear that nothing was ever going to change. No matter how many times I tried to impress him, it was always the same story. Liam was the favorite, and I was just there. I spent my teenage years basically coasting. I got decent grades, stayed out of trouble, and tried to fly under the radar as much as possible. But it was hard to completely ignore the constant comparisons. Every time I overheard my dad bragging to someone about Liam, it was like a punch in the gut. And when I finally left home, I thought I was done with all of it. Done with my dad, done with Liam, done with feeling like I didn't matter. That didn't last long, though. See, after I left, Liam and my dad got even closer. It was like without me there as a reminder of my mom, my dad could fully focus on his real son. They started spending even more time together, doing things I didn't really care to know about. At some point, I heard they started a business together. I didn't pay much attention to it at first because, honestly, I was just trying to figure out my own life at that point. I guess it started out small, just something local that wasn't meant to be anything big. From what little I picked up, it seemed like Liam came up with the idea, and my dad jumped in with both feet because, well, Liam could do no wrong. I'm not sure what the business even was exactly, but knowing Liam, it was probably something flashy. Maybe some kind of startup or side hustle that sounded way more impressive than it actually was. All I knew was that my dad was funding it completely, using whatever savings he had left. I wasn't part of their world anymore, but I could still hear bits and pieces from people who knew them. Every once in a while, I'd hear how well the business was doing, how Liam was going places, and making big moves. And every time, I felt that same familiar sting, the feeling that I was still just sitting on the sidelines while Liam was living the life I was never going to have. But then things started to change. I didn't know the full story at first, but something was off. People stopped mentioning Liam and the business as much. The updates I used to hear about their amazing success were starting to dry up. It was like the buzz around them was fading, and no one really talked about it anymore. I didn't think much of it, though, because I had my own stuff going on. Plus, I wasn't exactly in a rush to reconnect with my dad and Liam. Then one day, I got a phone call. The number wasn't saved in my phone, so I almost didn't pick up. But something told me to answer, and when I did, I was hit with a voice I hadn't heard in years. My dad. The second I heard his voice, my stomach dropped. I hadn't spoken to him in what felt like forever, and I could tell right away something was wrong. He didn't sound like the same confident, almost arrogant guy I remembered. He sounded defeated. I didn't even know what to say at first. He tried to make small talk, asking how I'd been, but it was awkward, like we were two strangers who had nothing in common, which, to be fair, was pretty much the truth at that point. Then he got to the point. He told me that things had gone bad with the business, real bad. Apparently, Liam had taken all the savings and run off. Just like that, gone. Everything my dad had invested, everything he'd worked for, it was all gone. Liam took it and disappeared. I didn't know how to react. I mean, part of me was shocked, but another part of me wasn't surprised at all. Liam had always been good at charming people, and I guess my dad finally learned that the hard way. What really got me, though, was that my dad was asking me for help. After years of treating me like I didn't matter, of making me feel like I was second place to Liam, now he was reaching out. Now, when everything had fallen apart, I was supposed to step in and save him? I couldn't believe it. My dad spent years ignoring me, favoring Liam, and suddenly he wanted me to fix things? He told me about how he was in debt, how everything was falling apart, and how he didn't know what to do. He sounded desperate, like he had nowhere else to turn. But the whole time, all I could think was, where was this when I needed him? When I asked why he wasn't asking Liam for help, he got quiet. He mumbled something about Liam not being around anymore, about how he didn't know where Liam went. My dad had poured everything into this business, and now he had nothing to show for it. I guess he finally realized what it felt like to be left behind. But you know what? I didn't feel bad for him. I should have, maybe. But I didn't. Because for years, that's exactly how he made me feel. Like I didn't matter. Like I was just an afterthought. And now he was coming to me because Liam, his golden child, had bailed on him. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't give him an answer right away. I told him I needed time to think, but deep down, I already knew what I was going to do. After hanging up the phone, I just sat there for a while, thinking about everything. All the years I spent trying to make my dad proud, all the times I tried to be enough. And now he needed me. It felt like some twisted joke, but I wasn't the same kid anymore, and this time I wasn't going to fall into the same trap. I had my own life to live now, and this time I was going to do things my way. So, after that phone call, I was left with a lot to think about. My dad had come to me, asking for help, which was wild in itself. After years of making me feel like I was just some background character in his life, now he needed me. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I mean, where was he when I needed help? When I was working late nights just to keep my head above water? When I was struggling to figure out what the hell to do with my life after dropping out of college because I couldn't afford it? He didn't care then. He never reached out, never asked if I was okay. And now, because Liam had bailed and his golden boy wasn't around to save him, I was suddenly important. It didn't sit right with me at all. The more I replayed that conversation in my head, the more I realized something. This was the first time in my life where I had the upper hand. For years, I was the one begging for his attention, his approval, and now the roles had reversed. But here's the thing. I didn't want his approval anymore. I didn't need it. I had spent years trying to prove myself, trying to be enough for him. But after that phone call, it was like everything clicked for me. I didn't owe him anything. I wasn't responsible for fixing the mess he and Liam had created. He made his choices, and I made mine. And my choice was to stand my ground. Over the next few days, my phone blew up with texts from him. At first, he tried to guilt me, saying things like, "I don't know what I'm going to do, and you're my only hope." It was honestly pathetic. This was the same man who once told me to man up when I was struggling with something. And now he was acting like a lost puppy because Liam had screwed him over. I didn't respond at first. I needed to sort through my own thoughts before I said anything. Part of me wanted to just cut him off completely, but another part of me felt bad. I mean, he was still my dad, and as much as he'd messed up, a tiny part of me still cared. Not enough to bail him out financially, but enough to consider talking to him. But every time I thought about picking up the phone, I remembered all the times I'd needed him and he wasn't there. When I was younger, I'd look at him and wonder why he didn't care. Why he never bothered to ask how I was doing or if I needed anything. And now he was asking me for help? It just didn't sit right with me. I kept thinking about one specific memory. It was from high school, right after I had gotten my first real job. I was working part-time at a local grocery store, bagging groceries and stocking shelves. It wasn't anything special, but I was proud of it because it was my job. I was earning my own money, even if it wasn't much. I remember coming home that first day excited to tell my dad about it. I thought maybe this would be one of those rare moments where he'd actually be proud of me. But of course, when I told him, all he said was, "That's nice. Is Liam still playing football this season?" It was like no matter what I did, Liam was always the focus. I couldn't even have my own small wins without them being overshadowed by whatever Liam was doing. That memory stuck with me through those days after the phone call. It was a constant reminder that I had always been second place in his life. And now, he was only reaching out because he had no one else. Not because he cared about me, not because he wanted to rebuild our relationship, but because he needed something from me. And I wasn't going to fall for it. Eventually, I decided to respond. I didn't want to leave him hanging forever, but I also wasn't going to just give him what he wanted. I took a deep breath and texted him back, something along the lines of, "I'm sorry you're going through this, but I can't help you financially. I've worked hard to get where I am, and I can't jeopardize that. I hope you find a solution." It was short, simple, and to the point. I didn't owe him a long explanation. I wasn't going to dive into a whole conversation about how he'd treated me over the years. That wasn't going to change anything. I just needed to be clear that I wasn't his safety net. After I sent the message, I felt a weird mix of emotions. On one hand, I felt guilty. I mean, he was still my dad, and part of me wanted to help. But on the other hand, I felt relieved. For the first time in my life, I had said no to him. I had set a boundary, and I wasn't backing down. I didn't hear back from him right away, which was honestly a relief. I think I needed some space to process everything. But I also knew he wasn't the type to let things go easily. Sure enough, a few days later, he called again. This time, I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to him yet. When I listened to the voicemail later, it was more of the same. He apologized again, said he wished things had been different, but he really needed my help. He even said he regretted some of the things he'd done in the past, but the way he said it didn't feel genuine. It felt like he was just saying whatever he thought would get me to give him money, and I wasn't falling for it. The thing is, I wasn't the same person I was when I lived under his roof. Back then, I would have jumped at the chance to help, thinking maybe this would finally make him love me, make him proud. But now? Now, I knew better. I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need to save him to feel like I was worth something. I had built my own life, without his help, and I wasn't going to sacrifice everything I'd worked for just because Liam had run off with his money. I had finally taken control of my own life, but I knew this wasn't over. My dad wasn't the type to give up easily, and I had a feeling there was more to come. Things went quiet for a bit. At first, it was kind of weird, like this weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but also left this empty space where all that stress used to be. I guess I expected him to keep pushing, to keep blowing up my phone or sending guilt-trippy messages. But nothing happened. Days went by, then weeks, and nothing. A part of me was relieved. I thought, maybe he's finally getting the message. Maybe he's finally understanding that I'm not going to bail him out. But another part of me felt off about it, like I wasn't used to him not being in my head, you know? For so long, I'd been trying to prove myself, trying to get his attention, and now I didn't need to do any of that. It felt strange. Life went on, though. I kept working my job, kept taking night classes, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally getting somewhere. My friends noticed too. They'd say stuff like, "You seem more relaxed lately," or "You've been in a better mood these days." And they were right. I had been carrying around this baggage for years, and now that I'd finally set boundaries with my dad, it felt like I could breathe. But of course, it didn't stay quiet forever. A few weeks later, my phone rang. I saw the number pop up, and it was my dad again. This time, I hesitated. I almost let it go to voicemail, like I'd done before, but something in me said to pick up. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I just wanted closure. So I answered. He sounded different this time. Less desperate, more tired. He didn't jump right into asking for money again, which was a surprise. Instead, he started talking about the past, about how he knew he hadn't been the best dad, about how he regretted not being there for me. It wasn't the first time he'd apologized, but this time, it felt a little different. It felt like he actually meant it, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was only saying it because things had gone bad for him. He told me more about what had happened with Liam, how Liam had taken everything, not just the savings, but also the business they'd built together. Apparently, Liam had been planning it for a while, pulling money out of the account here and there, making moves behind my dad's back. By the time my dad realized what was happening, it was too late. Liam was gone, and so was all the money. As he was telling me all of this, I couldn't help but think about all the times my dad had chosen Liam over me. All the times he had praised Liam, supported Liam, and completely ignored everything I'd done. And now here he was, left with nothing because of the person he'd put on a pedestal for so many years. I felt bad for him, but I couldn't bring myself to feel that bad. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. I listened to him talk, but I didn't offer any sympathy. I think he picked up on that because after a while he stopped talking about Liam and just said, "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to let you know what happened." And that was it. He didn't ask for money, didn't try to guilt me into anything. It was almost like he knew this was the end of the line. Like he'd finally realized I wasn't going to swoop in and save him from his own mistakes. After we hung up, I sat there for a while just thinking about everything. It was weird. I had spent so many years wanting him to admit he'd screwed up, wanting him to apologize, and now that he had, I didn't know how to feel. I thought maybe it would bring me some kind of closure, but instead it just felt empty, like it didn't really change anything. He had still spent most of my life treating me like I was second place. He had still chosen Liam over me at every turn. And now, just because things had gone bad for him, he wanted to make things right? It didn't work that way. The thing is, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't holding on to the resentment or the hurt like I used to. I had moved past all of that. But at the same time, I wasn't going to forget it. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal, especially when normal was never good to begin with. So, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cut him off completely, but I also wasn't going to let him back in. I'd keep my distance, stay polite if he reached out, but that was it. No more trying to win his approval, no more trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed. In the weeks after that call, I kept moving forward. I focused on my job, my classes, and my friends. I started to realize that I didn't need my dad's validation anymore. I had built a life for myself, a life I was proud of, and I didn't need anyone's approval to keep going. I thought a lot about what could have been, how different things might have been if my dad had been there for me when I was growing up. Maybe I wouldn't have had to work so hard to prove myself. Maybe I wouldn't have had to struggle through so many things on my own. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that those struggles had made me who I am. Sure, my dad wasn't there when I needed him, and yeah, that sucked. But I learned how to take care of myself. I learned how to push through tough times, how to keep going even when things felt impossible. And now, I was stronger because of it. So, in a way, I guess I owe him something. Not for being a good dad, but for forcing me to become the person I am today. I built my life without him, and now, I don't need him to complete it. Update. So, I found out recently that Liam, the guy who was basically treated like my dad's son, ended up in jail. I wasn't really surprised, to be honest. After everything he pulled with my dad, it seemed like only a matter of time before his schemes caught up with him. Turns out, after he took off with all the money from their business, he tried to pull another scam, this time on someone who wasn't as forgiving as my dad. Apparently, Liam thought he could take the money he'd stolen and start something new, but it didn't go as planned. From what I've heard, he tried to scam some other guy out of a large amount of money. Only this time, he got caught. The guy figured out what was going on and pressed charges. Before Liam knew it, he was in handcuffs and facing a serious legal situation. I'll admit, when I first heard the news, I didn't feel bad for him at all. After all, this was the same guy who walked all over my dad, took everything he could, and then vanished without a second thought. And now karma had finally caught up with him. It's kind of ironic, really. My dad had always put Liam on a pedestal, treating him like he was some perfect son, while I was the one who got left in the dust. And now here Liam was, sitting in a jail cell, while I was out here building my life, little by little. I don't know what'll happen with Liam from here, but honestly, it's not my problem. He made his choices, and now he's dealing with the consequences. Meanwhile, I'm moving forward, leaving all that behind. It's weird how things turn out sometimes. You spend your whole life thinking someone has it all figured out, only to watch them fall apart in the end. But that's not my story anymore. Liam's path is his own, and mine is finally my own too.
Hey Kyle, I've sent the living expenses for this month. Please be careful with your spending, okay? At the end of every month, I called Kyle to confirm the transfer. I thought he might find frequent calls annoying, but I still wanted to hear his cheerful voice at least once a month. Thanks for the $15, Mom. I've been living on ramen noodles every day. Wait, what? I've been sending you $1,500 each month. What? We were both confused. According to my bank statement, I had indeed transferred $1,500 to Kyle's account. Why did he think it was only a fraction of that? $15 doesn't go far. But Kyle, isn't your company struggling right now? What are you talking about? My company is doing better than ever. I was even thinking about increasing your allowance. Kyle let out a surprised "Ha." Who told Kyle my company was in trouble? I pressed him for answers, feeling my temper rise. Kyle, I'll handle this. Don't worry. I hung up, determined to get to the bottom of this. I was going to Kyle's place and then we'd go to the police. I had a suspect in mind, and I wouldn't let him get away with it. I'm Monica, a 49-year-old single mother. I divorced my husband while pregnant and have raised Kyle on my own ever since. Thanks to our family business, I managed to work and study hard, ensuring a stable life for us. Kyle never suffered because he had just one parent. Kyle has always been serious, though a bit absent-minded. His grades were always top-notch. When my father fell ill during Kyle's elementary school years, it inspired him to become a doctor. He worked hard and got into a prestigious medical school at the top of his class. I planned to cover his university expenses, but Kyle earned a tuition waiver, which was a huge relief. I'm so proud of his hard work and achievements. The university was a 2-hour train ride from home, so I used the money saved from tuition for him to live near the university. We found a student dormitory where he could stay. It was a bit sad not being able to see his room due to the dorm's rules, but I understood it was part of his journey to independence. For the first few days, Kyle contacted me regularly. After a week, his messages became less frequent, and after a month, I hardly heard from him. I assumed he was busy adjusting to university life and didn't have much time to call. I decided to wait and see, believing no news is good news. A week before the summer break, Kyle finally called. He was excited about his classes, his part-time job, and mentioned he planned to come home for the holidays. Hearing his lively voice was a relief. Kyle asked if he could bring a friend from the dorm who had nowhere to go for the holidays. Considering Kyle's usual shyness, inviting a friend meant they had really hit it off. I agreed without hesitation. "Hello." When I saw the friend Kyle brought home for the holiday, I was speechless. I had assumed he would look as reserved as Kyle. However, standing at the front door was a boy with blonde hair and several piercings in both ears. "Welcome." "Ah, are you Kyle's mom? You're so pretty you must be popular." Well, maybe." Ignoring my discomfort, the friend David made himself at home and sat down on the living room sofa. I wanted to say something about his presumptuous attitude, but I held back because he was a friend of Kyle's after all. During his 3-day stay, David was bossing Kyle around with this and that. It made me anxious, but Kyle didn't seem to mind too much. "Hey, Kyle, let's hit up the arcade." "There's no arcade around here." "That's lame." If he was bored, he could just go home. Over these 3 days, I grew to dislike David quite a bit because he was always clinging to Kyle. I couldn't get any time with my son. He was disrupting our precious family time, and frankly, I wished he would just go home. In the end, David didn't just stay for 3 days. He stayed until Kyle left, and I didn't get any time with Kyle at all. After they returned to the dormitory, Kyle's calls became sporadic. Still, I received a thank you for the money and a brief update on his life once a month, so I believed he would be all right since he was almost an adult. But come fall, I got a call from Kyle mid-month, which was unusual. "Sorry, I've been a bit busy and can't work my part-time job. I can't make rent. Could you send me some money?" "Is it because of exams? But I'm not thrilled about you overspending. I'll send it this time, but be careful from now on." When I said that, Kyle replied with a dispirited, "I'm really sorry." It was unlike Kyle to run into money trouble, so I had a feeling David might be involved. "Hey, is there something you're struggling with right now?" "I'm fine. Thanks for everything. Don't overdo it, all right." "Got it." Kyle's lack of energy in his voice concerned me, but I thought he must be feeling down because it was the first time he had money problems. Then, at the end of the next month, I called Kyle. "Hello, Kyle. I've put this month's living expenses into your account. Don't waste it, okay?" I always called him at the end of the month to confirm the transfer. I figured calling a young man too often might be annoying, but I still wanted to hear his cheerful voice at least once a month. "Thanks for the $15 each month. I'm eating ramen noodle every day." "What?" "I've been transferring $1,500 every month." "Huh." We both were puzzled by what the other had said. According to my bank book, I had been transferring the usual $1,500 into Kyle's account, so why did he think he was only receiving 1/10 of that? $15 isn't enough for anything. "But Mom, isn't your company having a tough time?" "What are you talking about? This year's been our best yet. I was actually thinking of increasing the amount I sent you." Kyle responded with a surprised, "Huh," to my words. "Where on earth did you hear that my company was in trouble?" I managed to find out who said it, and it made my blood boil. "Kyle, I swear your mom is going to sort this out." I hung up the phone, intent on heading to Kyle's place. Once I pick Kyle up, I plan on going to the police station. The culprit is definitely that guy. I won't forgive him. I took a cab from the nearest station and stopped near the student dorms. Then I called Kyle and told him to sneak out. "Make sure no one sees you, okay?" "Why?" "Just do it." Kyle seemed unconvinced, but he kept his promise and snuck out of the dorm. As he turned the corner and approached the car, I nearly screamed. "Mom, it's been a while." "Kyle, what happened to you? To your body?" He was healthy when I saw him in the summer, but now in front of me was my son, looking nothing but skin and bones. What on earth had happened? I asked Kyle cautiously, "Kyle, you've lost so much weight. What happened?" At first, Kyle said it was nothing, but gradually he began to explain his current situation. "Mom, after I returned from visiting home, you sent me a new bank book for a new account, remember? Since then, the allowance you've been sending has been cut to $15, right? I was really struggling, but I heard from David when I was home that you were talking about folding the company, so I thought life must be tough." I was stunned to hear this. I have no memory of discussing such things with Kyle while he was home. The company has been achieving its best performance this year. I have no intention of folding it. There was something else in Kyle's story that bothered me. "Hey, what new account are you talking about?" "Huh. That's right. I've never created a new account since Kyle was born. Moreover, I've been depositing $1,500 into the same account every month. A horrible feeling came over me. "Kyle, let's go to the police." "The police? Why?" "Because someone might be stealing the money I've been sending to you." When I said this, Kyle's eyes widened in disbelief, but then, as if he realized something, he began to think. Could it be? Kyle's suspicions were probably correct. Thinking of how Kyle has been hurt made my heart ache, but the person responsible for this needs to be held accountable. "Driver, please take us to the nearest police station." Upon my request, the cab started moving. The taxi driver, having overheard our conversation, kindly took us to the biggest police station in town. When we arrived at the police station, I supported Kyle as we entered. Kyle used to be so conscientious about his diet and was in such good shape due to sports, but now he seems even lighter than me. As we walked, tears blurred my vision. The young man at the police station listened to both our stories and offered words of comfort. "First, you've done well to endure through tough times," he said, and Kyle started crying as if a dam had burst. "It turns out we've had similar complaints from this student dorm area lately." "Really?" "According to the police officer, in the last month there have been about 3 families who have come with complaints similar to ours, and all of them unanimously pointed to a person named David as the culprit." "Is the person you're talking about by any chance David?" I asked, and the police officer sighed and nodded. Kyle was looking down beside me. He probably suspected it, but really hoped it wasn't true. I put my hand on Kyle's back and looked at the police officer. "Is there an ongoing investigation?" After a moment of thought, the police officer took Kyle and me to a separate room. He asked us to file a complaint. Of course, I agreed and immediately filled out the complaint form. After submitting it, an officer sat down with us and explained the current status of the investigation. David was like the contact person, getting close to the victims to obtain their account and PIN numbers to withdraw the funds, and it seems that they are currently investigating whether a certain man is the one receiving the stolen money. I stood up in shock when I saw the photo they presented. "I know this man." "Excuse me?" Even the police seemed surprised, their eyes wide as they looked over at us. I took a deep breath to calm my pounding heart. Then I began to talk about the man in the picture. "That's John Miller, right? He's my ex-husband and Kyle's father." "Wait, my dad?" "Yes, the man in the photo was John, my former husband. The reason for our divorce was a mix of financial issues and affairs. After the divorce, I lost touch with him and never received child support. I thought it better that Kyle not meet him and be influenced negatively, so I never followed up on John's whereabouts, but I never imagined he'd be involved in a police matter. I felt a chill run through me. Basically, Kyle had been scammed by both an important friend and his biological father. Kyle was so shocked that he just stood there with his mouth open. Actually, we found out that John and David are father and son as well. What? David had told me before that he was the same age as Kyle. Kyle's dorm does thorough ID checks, so that was probably true. But if that's the case, it means that John had another woman pregnant at the same time as me. I no longer have any feelings for John, and though it's after the fact, it was still a shock. Are you saying David and I are brothers? Kyle seemed unable to comprehend this astonishing revelation. I was at a loss for words in the face of this unexpected fact. I'm sorry, but we need a bit of your cooperation. Of course, I won't hesitate to help catch those two. Kyle gave a small nod in agreement with my words. Following the police's instructions, we decided to take the necessary actions. I sneakily returned Kyle to the dorm, and I stayed at a nearby hotel. The next day, I waited for the right moment when David was around and called. Hey, is Kyle doing all right? Claiming that Kyle was busy washing dishes, I deliberately put the call on speakerphone. From this action, I gathered that David must be nearby. I've come into a bit of unexpected money, so I'll transfer it to your account. Make sure you use it wisely. Got it, thanks, Kyle said and hung up the phone. I stopped the voice recorder I had on hand, then I transferred $10,000 to an account under Kyle's name. The next morning, Kyle checked his online banking and sent the proof to the police. After stopping by a certain place, I went to the dorm with the police. I explained the situation to the dorm manager, who immediately took us to David's room. When I pressed the bell, annoying footsteps approached from inside. Who is it? Wait, what? David opened the door briskly and froze. He didn't understand why Kyle's mother and the police were standing together in a place where outsiders were not allowed. David seemed genuinely clueless. I put on a smile for the confused David. Long time no see, David. I'm Kyle's mom. What do you want with me, Kyle's mom? And you brought the cops. David looked at Kyle beside me and guessed what we were there for. We have a warrant and are going to conduct a search now. I'm really sorry, I have to go out. Can we do this another time? Without skipping a beat in response to the police officer's words, David tried to forcefully shut the door, but the police weren't about to let that happen. Two men managed to open David's apartment door and started their search. Soon after the search began, there were calls from all around. Found something. Hearing this, David seemed to slump his shoulders in resignation. Leaving David behind, Kyle and I entered the room. On the table, there were several passbooks and cards, all laid out. Each one was for an account under a different name. Looking at them, my head started to hurt. The cops, with practiced hands, sorted them by name and began snapping photos. How did this get out? Kyle, did you rat me out? I thought you were my best friend. You must have been laughing at me on the inside while I was going through tough times. It's not what it looks like. There's an explanation for all this. David tried to come up with all sorts of excuses to escape blame, but Kyle didn't react at all. Agitated by Kyle's attitude, David looked as if he was about to grab him at any moment. That's when I opened my mouth. Swindling money from your own half-brother. That's just the lowest of the low. Half-brother? Who's related to whom? You and Kyle are half-brothers, I said. Frozen by my words, David stood still. Given that he had limited his targets to students, it seemed certain that he had shared the preliminary investigation information with John. Because of my family's unique business, when John did some digging on Kyle, he would have quickly realized that he's my son. No way. It's true. John Miller is my ex-husband and Kyle's biological father. It seems he was having an affair at the same time, though, and that's when you were born. As I said this, David sat down in shock. From the police investigation, I knew that David had a sickly sister. After divorcing me, John immediately married his then-mistress. However, it seems the mistress did not want a boy, so David was neglected and raised haphazardly. As soon as the sister was born, John and the mistress divorced. The sister, being expensive to treat, was taken in by her maternal side, and it seemed David was taken in by John. They met his siblings from time to time, and during those meetings, David had been giving money to his mother for medical expenses. Learning this, I felt the significant presence that the concept of siblings held for David, and it seemed my hunch was correct. I've been exploiting my own siblings. With those final words, David was taken away by the police. Kyle and I just went to the police station and were shown only the parts of the passbooks that concerned us. It turns out David had been getting people drunk or accompanying them shopping, and when stopping at the ATM, he would take note of the pins. Later, he would visit their rooms and take the passbooks, cards, and even IDs. The reason he had come back home with Kyle during the holiday was to check if my family was wealthy. He would then create new accounts, hand them over to the victims, and whenever money was deposited into their original accounts, he would withdraw everything only to deposit a little back into the new ones. No wonder I couldn't figure out what I had spent my money on when I updated my passbook. Now it all made sense, and I sighed. It didn't take long for David to name John as an accomplice, and by the next evening, John too had been apprehended. I went to the police and shared everything about John's background with them. A little while later, I went to visit John. Kyle wanted to come, but I asked to go alone this time and had let him wait outside. John, whom I hadn't seen in 20 years, had aged, but his attitude of looking down on others was still there. "Man, I've really done it this time. Got too carried away, I guess." Without a hint of remorse, that's what John said, and I couldn't hold back my anger. But yelling now would just wash away all the effort I've put in so far. I forced a smile. "Pathetic, aren't you? Lost it all on the horses, but hey, I'll just call my folks after ages and get out of here soon." John replied casually, as if making small talk. I slapped a piece of paper in front of him. His smug look changed instantly. "Hey, what the heck is this about?" "Oh, that. I told your parents everything about you." His parents, decent folks, kept in touch with me even after our divorce. They told me to bring this when I said I was going to see you today. "What are you talking about? This is a disavowment letter." John lunged at me from behind the glass. I calmly replied, "You wouldn't understand their hardships, would you? They've been putting off seeing their own grandson, Kyle, because of your mess. You should have let me see him. Don't you dare say that after all you're running away." Raising my voice, a cop in the room told me to calm down. I took a deep breath to settle down. "Anyway, this means I can finally show your mother her grandson. Oh, and about David." "What about David? He's got nothing to do with you." "He doesn't want to see you ever again. Says he doesn't want anything to do with a father who'd exploit his own kids. Your mom said she'd take him in." "You're kidding. Without him, how am I supposed to live?" John sounded so pitiful that I just had to laugh. "Well, maybe you should start working and pay off your alimony." "Monica, come on. We go way back, right? Help me out." How funny. Whatever we had ended 20 years ago. I answered with the biggest smile of the day, and John looked utterly hopeless. Feeling a wave of relief, I walked out of the visiting room without looking back. John's other crimes came to light, and he got a prison sentence. He won't be out for at least 5 years, giving us all some peace of mind. David, being a minor, ended up on probation. He's apparently being re-educated under the strict guidance of his foster parents now. Their home is even deeper in the boondocks than ours, with absolutely no form of entertainment, so it seems David's having a tough time. By the way, his sister is planning to undergo surgery abroad, and the money David was desperately gathering was for that purpose. However, it turned out that John had been embezzling those funds. David seems like he's still at an age where he'd want to enjoy himself, but each time he gets a talking to from his foster parents. Kyle was initially confused, but he's buckled down and is studying hard to become a doctor, which was his original goal. He's been moving up in school and is about to face the national board exams soon. As for me, my company has grown even more, and I've been able to increase the financial support I give to Kyle. On top of that, someone who has been with the company through thick and thin and who Kyle has been fond of since he was a kid has unexpectedly proposed to me, and I'm currently holding off on my answer. It was Kyle who suggested that this person should propose, saying, "You might as well marry rather than just date." I was a bit impressed. He knows me so well. Nevertheless, with Kyle's clinical rotations and exams coming up next year, the expenses will surely increase. I'm thinking that I should first support Kyle in becoming a fine doctor before I start considering my own future.
The call came just as I was scrubbing dried egg yolk off my favorite breakfast plate. My father's name lit up my phone screen for the first time in 15 years, and I nearly dropped the dish into the sink. For a moment, I just stood there, water running over my hands, wondering if this was some kind of cosmic joke. My name is Morgan, and until that moment, I thought I had my life figured out. Sure, my marriage to Sam wasn't perfect, but whose is? And yes, maybe our son Jake hadn't spoken to us in months, but that's what kids do in college, right? They drift away, find themselves. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I let the phone ring 4 times before answering. Hello. Morgan. My father's voice was thinner than I remembered, but it still carried that stern edge that used to make me sit up straighter at the dinner table. I need to see you. Walter. I switched off the faucet, wiping my hands on my jeans. Is everything okay? A dry chuckle crackled through the line. No, not really. I'm dying, Morgan. Cancer. Doctors say I've got about 6 months. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. I pulled out a chair and sank into it, my legs weak. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything then. Just come see me. There are things we need to discuss. Things about your mother, about what happened back then. My stomach clenched. That was 15 years ago. We both agreed. No, he cut me off. You agreed. You and that husband of yours. I just watched you walk away. From somewhere upstairs, I heard Sam moving around, probably getting ready for work. His footsteps always seemed heavier lately, like he was carrying some invisible weight. Look, my father continued, his voice softening slightly. I know this isn't fair, but I found something in your mother's old things. A letter. It's about that summer, Morgan. The one before everything fell apart. I closed my eyes, memories threatening to surface. Dad, I can't just. Please. The word hung there, foreign and desperate from a man who'd never begged for anything in his life. I'm at the same house. You remember the address? Of course I do. How could I forget? The white colonial with the crooked mailbox, where my mother had planted roses that never quite took. Where everything had changed. Come today if you can. Alone. He paused, and I could hear him struggling to catch his breath. And Morgan? Don't tell Sam. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there, staring at my phone, until Sam's footsteps reached the kitchen doorway. Everything okay, honey? His voice was casual, but there was something else there. Something watchful in the way he leaned against the doorframe in his perfectly pressed suit. Wrong number, I said, the lie slipping out easier than it should have. Just some telemarketer. Sam nodded, adjusting his tie. Listen, I've got a late meeting tonight. Don't wait up. Another late meeting. They've been happening more frequently lately, along with the mysterious phone calls he took in our garage and the receipts I found for restaurants I'd never been to. Sure. I smiled, the expression feeling plastic on my face. I might go visit an old friend anyway. He barely looked at me as he grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway before I let myself really think about what I was about to do. My father was dying. He had a letter from my mother, and whatever was in it had been important enough to break 15 years of silence. I glanced at the clock, 9:15 a.m. Sam wouldn't be home until late. He'd made that clear. Plenty of time to drive to my childhood home and finally face whatever truth my father needed to share. What I didn't know then was that this wasn't just about my father's secrets. It was about Sam's too. And by the end of that day, everything I thought I knew about my life would be turned upside down. The drive to my father's house felt like traveling back in time. Every landmark brought back memories I'd spent years trying to forget. As I pulled into the cracked driveway, I noticed the roses were gone, replaced by overgrown weeds that seemed to be slowly consuming the house itself. My father opened the door before I could knock. The sight of him knocked the wind out of me. The commanding presence I remembered had shrunk into someone I barely recognized, gaunt, pale, with clothes that hung loose on his frame. "You look just like your mother," he said, his voice rougher than it had been on the phone. I followed him inside, where time seemed to have stopped 15 years ago. The same faded wallpaper, the same worn furniture, even the same smell of coffee and old books. But there was something else now, the sterile scent of medication and illness. "You should have told me sooner," I said, watching him lower himself carefully into his old armchair. He waved off my concern. "Would you have come?" The question hung between us like smoke. We both knew the answer. "I found this last week," he said, reaching for an envelope on the side table. "Your mother left it in her recipe box. It's dated just before everything happened." My hands trembled as I took it. The envelope was yellowed, my mother's elegant handwriting faded but still clear. "For Morgan, when the truth comes out." "Have you read it?" He shook his head. "Wasn't meant for me. But Morgan, there's something else you need to know. Something about that summer, about why I couldn't help you and Sam." A sudden coughing fit seized him, violent enough to double him over. I rushed to get him water, finding my way around the kitchen as if I'd never left. When I returned, there was blood on his handkerchief. "How bad is it?" I asked, handing him the glass. "Stage 4. Started in the lungs, spread to the liver." He took a careful sip. "The treatments might buy me a few more months, but they cost more than I have. I had to remortgage the house just to start them." I sat down heavily on the couch. "Why didn't you ask for help?" "Because I still owe people money from last time. From when you came to me about Sam's gambling debts." The memory hit me like a slap. Sam, wild-eyed and desperate, confessing he'd lost everything. Me, begging my father for help. The look of disappointment on his face as he wrote the check that would save my marriage but destroy our relationship. "That debt was paid," I said quietly.
No.
He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "What I gave Sam that day wasn't mine to give. I borrowed it, Morgan, from people who don't forget. And now they're calling it in." My phone buzzed, a text from Sam. "Where are you? We need to talk about the account." I ignored it, my mind racing. "How much?" "With interest?" "Close to $500,000. The room seemed to tilt. "That's impossible. Sam told me he paid you back within a year." My father's laugh was bitter. "Is that what he told you? Read your mother's letter, Morgan. She knew things about Sam, things she tried to warn me about before she died. I didn't listen then, but maybe you will now." Another text from Sam. "Seriously, where are you? The bank called." I stared at the envelope in my hands, remembering Sam's late meeting tonight, all the unexplained absences, the way money seemed to disappear from our accounts lately. "There's something else," my father said, his voice growing weaker. "The people I borrowed from? They've been watching Sam. They say he's in trouble again, deeper than before. And this time, he's dragged someone else into it." My blood ran cold.
Who? Jake.
"Your son came to see me last month. He was asking questions about Sam's business partners. Said he'd found something in Sam's office that scared him." The third text from Sam came just as my father finished speaking. "The police were just here. Don't go home." I looked up from my phone to meet my father's knowing gaze. Whatever was in my mother's letter, whatever Sam had done, one thing was clear: the life I'd built on 15 years of silence was about to come crashing down. And somewhere in the middle of it all was my son, walking into the same trap that had snared me all those years ago. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I sat in my car outside Jake's apartment near campus, My mother's unopened letter burning a hole in my purse. Watching shadows move behind his window. My phone had exploded with messages from Sam, each one more desperate than the last. But it was the single text from Jake that kept me frozen in place. Don't trust Dad. Don't tell him you're coming to see me. When Jake finally emerged from his building, he looked older somehow, his shoulders tight with tension. He spotted my car immediately, as if he'd been expecting me. We can't talk here, he said, sliding into the passenger seat. There's a diner about 20 minutes away. Follow my directions. The Jake I knew would have hugged me, would have had 1,000 questions about why I was there. This Jake stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Your grandfather told me you visited him, I said, pulling away from the curb. Yeah, well, someone had to look into what Dad's been doing. He glanced at his phone, then turned it off completely. Did you know he's been using my social security number? My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What? Turn left here. Jake's voice was flat. He opened accounts in my name. Credit cards, loans. I found the paperwork in his office when I was home last month. That's why I went to see Grandpa Walter. I thought maybe he knew something about Dad's business partners. The diner appeared ahead, a neon oasis in the growing dark. Inside, Jake chose a booth far from the windows. He looked exhausted up close, with dark circles under his eyes that reminded me too much of his father. How bad is it? Asked after the waitress brought us coffee. Jake pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. See for yourself. The documents inside told a story that made my stomach turn. Credit applications, bank statements, loan documents, all in Jake's name, all signed with perfect forgeries of his signature. The amounts were staggering. There's more, Jake said, his voice finally cracking. I followed Dad last week. He met with these guys. They didn't look like regular businessmen. One of them mentioned something about collection methods if the payments didn't come through. A memory surfaced. Sam's split lip and bruised ribs 15 years ago, his shaking hands as he begged me to ask my father for money. History wasn't just repeating itself, it was escalating. Why didn't you come to me? I asked. Jake's laugh was bitter. Like you came to me about Grandpa being sick? Or about whatever happened 15 years ago that tore the family apart. We don't talk about real things in our family, Mom. We just pretend everything's fine until it explodes. Before I could respond, Jake's phone, which he'd turned back on, buzzed with a text. The color drained from his face as he read it. Dad knows I have the documents, he said. He's at my apartment right now. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. How? My roommate must have told him. Jake ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so like his father's it hurt to watch. Mom, there's something else. I found another set of papers in Dad's office. Letters from someone named Claire. They're not just business letters. The name hit me like a physical blow. Claire. The woman Sam had almost left me for before everything fell apart 15 years ago. The reason we'd needed my father's money in the first place. My phone lit up with a new message from Sam. I know Jake showed you the papers. We can fix this. Like we fixed it last time. Just come home and we'll talk. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the weight of secrets crushing him just like they'd crushed me at his age. I thought about my mother's letter, still unread, about my dying father and his unpaid debts, about all the lies I'd told myself to keep my marriage intact. No, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. We're not fixing it this time. We're ending it. Jake's eyes widened. What are you going to do? I pulled out my mother's letter, finally ready to read it. First, we're going to learn the truth. All of it. Then we're going to make your father face what he's done. To all of us. What I didn't tell Jake was that I'd seen a business card fall from his folder. Detective Laura Bennett, Financial Crimes Division. My son had already started down a path that would either save us or destroy us all. My mother's handwriting blurred as I read her letter for the third time, sitting in my father's kitchen while Jake paced and Walter dozed in his chair. The truth she'd tried to warn us about 15 years ago was worse than I'd imagined. Sam hadn't just been gambling back then. He'd been laundering money for the same people who were now threatening our son. We need to go to the police, Jake said, stopping by the window. Detective Bennett already has a file on Dad's activities. I folded the letter carefully. It's not that simple. If we report him, these people will come after all of us, including your grandfather. They're already coming after us. Jake's voice cracked. Look what they made Dad do to me. Using my identity, forging my signature. He's destroyed my credit, my future. A knock at the door made us all freeze. Walter stirred in his chair, suddenly alert despite his medication. Jake moved away from the window, and I saw fear flash across his face. It's Sam, he whispered. His car's outside. Before I could stop him, Walter was pushing himself up, moving toward the door with surprising speed. When he opened it, Sam stood there in his perfectly tailored suit, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. Morgan. His voice was soft, reasonable, the voice he used when closing deals. We need to talk.
No.
The word came out stronger than I expected. Whatever you're going to say, the answer is no. He stepped inside anyway, his eyes taking in Jake's presence, the letter in my hands, Walter's defensive stance. You don't understand. I had to do it. They were going to take everything. Like you took everything from me? Jake moved forward, but I caught his arm. Did you think I wouldn't find out about the loans? About Claire? Sam's face went white at the name. You've been in my office. Someone had to look for the truth. Jake shot back. Mom wouldn't. Grandpa couldn't. So I did. The truth? Sam laughed, but there was an edge of hysteria to it. You want the truth? Fine. I made mistakes. But everything I did to protect this family. To give you the life you deserved. By stealing my identity? Jake pulled away from me. By threatening Grandpa? I never threatened. No. Walter cut in, his voice steady despite his weakness. You just sent your business associates to do it for you. Like you did 15 years ago. Sam turned to me, his eyes pleading. Morgan, please. We can fix this. I have a plan. One last deal that will set everything right. Like the last deal? I opened my mother's letter. The one that got Kevin Martinez killed? The name hung in the air like smoke. Sam's face went from white to gray. How did you? He started. Mom knew, I said quietly. She wrote it all down before she died. How you convinced Kevin to help you move money through his restaurant. How he threatened to go to the police when he found out where the money came from. How he disappeared 3 days later. That wasn't me, Sam whispered, but his hands were shaking. I didn't know they would. A car door slammed outside. Through the window, I saw 2 men in dark suits approaching the house. Sam's business associates, right on schedule. Jake, I said, keeping my voice steady, take your grandfather to the back room.
Now.
Morgan. Sam reached for me, but I stepped back. You have 2 choices, I said, pulling out Detective Bennett's card. Either you tell these men you're done, that you're going to the police and taking whatever deal they offer, or I make the call right now. They'll kill me, he said. Maybe. I met his eyes. But if you don't choose, they'll kill all of us, including your son. The knock came, heavy and insistent. Sam looked at the door, then at me, then at the hallway where Jake had disappeared with Walter. 25 years of marriage, and I finally saw him clearly, a man trapped by his own lies, desperate to maintain control even as everything crumbled. Time's up, I said, holding up my phone. What's it going to be? The knocking grew louder, and Sam made his choice. But it wasn't the one any of us expected. Sam opened the door before I could stop him. The 2 men pushed past him into Walter's house like they owned it, their expensive suits a stark contrast to the worn furniture and faded walls. I recognized one of them from photos in my mother's letter. Marcus Chin, the man who'd visited Kevin Martinez the night he disappeared. Family reunion? Marcus smiled, but his eyes were cold. How touching. The other man closed the door, positioning himself in front of it. Sam stood between them and me, his hands raised in a placating gesture. I can explain everything. No need, Marcus said. We already know about the detective, about the evidence your son collected, about the letter. He looked at me. Your mother was quite thorough, wasn't she, Mrs. Flynn? A crash from the back room made everyone turn. Jake appeared in the hallway, supporting Walter, who looked even paler than before. Get out of my house, Walter wheezed, but the effort sent him into another coughing fit. Dad, please, I started, but Marcus cut me off. Actually, this works out perfectly. Everyone who needs to hear this is right here. He pulled out his phone, showing us a video. My stomach dropped as I recognized Detective Bennett entering a building. Your detective friend? She had an unfortunate accident an hour ago. Nothing fatal, we're not monsters. But she'll be indisposed for a while. Jake took a step forward, but I grabbed his arm. Don't. Smart woman, Marcus nodded. Now, here's what's going to happen. Sam's going to finish what he started. One more transaction, clean and simple. Jake's identity is already in place for the accounts.
No.
The word came out before I could stop it. Marcus's smile widened. No? Maybe I should show you another video. This one's from 15 years ago. Kevin Martinez's last night at his restaurant. Sam, you remember that night, don't you? Sam's face went ashen. You said you deleted that. Insurance, Marcus shrugged. Like the new evidence we have about Walter's involvement in covering up certain financial irregularities. Prison's not kind to sick old men. I felt the weight of Detective Bennett's card in my pocket, now useless. My mother's letter seemed to burn where I'd tucked it into my waistband. She'd known this might happen, had tried to warn us about the web Sam was weaving. How much? I asked. Mom, no. Jake started. 5 million, Marcus said. Through the account Sam set up in Jake's name. Clean, untraceable. Or we start sending videos to the police. First Kevin's, then some interesting footage of Walter from back in the day. Maybe even that security tape from Sam's office showing Jake stealing documents. The second man moved away from the door, pulling out papers. Everything's ready. Just needs the right signatures. I looked at my family, Jake, his youth already marked by our mistakes. Walter, dying but still trying to protect us. Sam, trapped in a prison of his own making. 25 years of choices, lies, and compromises had led us here. Then I remembered something else from my mother's letter. A safety deposit box key, taped to the last page. What if I could offer you something better than money? Marcus raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Mom, what are you doing? Jake whispered. I pulled out my phone, bringing up a photo I'd taken of one particular page from my mother's letter. Kevin Martinez kept records. Everything about your operation, going back 30 years.
My mother found them before she died.
They're in a safety deposit box. Marcus's smile faltered for the first time. You're bluffing. Am I? Why do you think she wrote that letter? Why do you think Sam's been so desperate to find it? I looked at my husband, seeing the recognition dawn in his eyes. That's what you were really looking for all these years, wasn't it? Sam nodded slowly, finally understanding. The records. They destroy everything. Here's my offer, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Leave my family alone. All of us, including Sam. In return, those records stay buried. Marcus studied me for a long moment, and if we refuse? I held up my phone. Then every news outlet in the country gets these photos in the next 5 minutes. I may go down, but I'll take you with me. The silence that followed was deafening. In it, I heard my mother's voice from the letter. Sometimes the only way to protect what matters is to risk everything. Marcus made his choice. But this time, we were ready for it. Marcus's choice came in the form of a single nod to his partner. Before any of us could react, the second man grabbed Jake, pressing something against his back. The implied threat was clear. The safety deposit box, Marcus said calmly.
Now.
My bluff had failed. Worse, I'd put Jake in danger. Sam stepped forward, but Marcus raised a hand. Stay where you are, or your son learns exactly how his namesake Uncle Jimmy died. The color drained from Sam's face. You said. I say lots of things, Sam. Like how I said your family would be protected if you played along. Marcus turned to me. The key, Mrs. Flynn. Don't make me ask again. Walter struggled to stand straighter. Morgan, don't. Shut up, old man, Marcus snapped. Your daughter's going to make the right choice. Just like she did 15 years ago when she chose to keep quiet about Kevin Martinez. The truth hit me like a physical blow. You knew? All this time. You knew I saw what happened. Of course we knew. Why do you think Sam married you so quickly afterward? We needed insurance that you'd keep quiet. Marcus smiled. Sam played his part perfectly. Didn't you, Sam? I looked at my husband. Really looked at him. 25 years of marriage, and I finally saw the truth in his eyes. It wasn't real. Any of it. Morgan, please, Sam's voice cracked. It started that way, but… The key, Marcus interrupted. Or should we discuss this family's history in front of Jake? Jake struggled against his captor. Mom, don't give them anything. Whatever it is, it's not worth. The man holding him tightened his grip, and Jake's words cut off in a gasp of pain. My mother's letter had warned me about this moment. When they come, she'd written, they'll try to take everything. Don't let them take your soul, too. I pulled out the safety deposit box key, watching Marcus's eyes light up with triumph. But as I held it out, Walter suddenly lurched forward, knocking into the man holding Jake. In the chaos that followed, several things happened at once. Jake broke free, stumbling toward me. Walter collapsed, his breathing ragged. And through the window, I caught a flash of red and blue lights. Marcus saw them too. His face twisted with rage as he grabbed the key from my hand. You called them. No, I said, helping Walter into a chair. But I knew someone would. Sam stepped between Marcus and me. It's over. The police are here. You're right, Marcus said softly. Then he pulled out a gun. It is over. The front door burst open, and Detective Bennett appeared, arm in a sling but eyes fierce. Drop it, Marcus. More officers poured in behind her. Marcus looked at the key in his hand, then at me. You know what's funny? The box is empty. Has been for years. Your mother moved everything to a digital file before she died. He smiled one last time. Check your email, Mrs. Flynn. I'm sure it's fascinating reading. As the police took Marcus and his partner into custody, I opened my phone with trembling hands. There it was, an email from my mother, dated to be delivered today. 15 years of secrets, waiting to destroy what was left of my family. Mom? Jake's voice was small, uncertain. What does he mean about Dad marrying you? About Uncle Jimmy? I looked at Sam, who stood defeated by the window. At Walter, who couldn't meet my eyes. At Detective Bennett, who watched me with something like pity. The truth, I said finally, is that our whole life has been built on lies. And now we have to decide what to do with them. My phone felt heavy in my hand, my mother's email unopened. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it just shows you the bars of your cage more clearly. But as I stood there in my father's house, surrounded by the wreckage of 25 years of deception, I realized something. The only way forward was through the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I opened the email and began to read. Detective Bennett sat across from me in the station's interview room, my mother's email printed out between us. Outside, I could hear Sam being processed, his voice carrying that same smooth confidence he'd used to lie to me for 25 years. Your mother was thorough, Bennett said, tapping the papers. Bank records, photographs, recordings, everything we need to put Marcus away for life. And Sam. What about Jimmy? I asked. Sam's brother? Bennett's expression softened. The file confirms what Marcus implied. Jimmy Flynn didn't die in a car accident. He was killed after threatening to expose their operation. Sam knew. He's always known. A knock at the door interrupted us. Jake stood there, looking older than his 21 years. They're ready for Mom's statement. Wait, I said as Bennett started to rise. There's something else you need to see. I pulled out my phone, showing them the text I'd received an hour ago from an unknown number. Meet me at Kevin's old restaurant. Come alone, or Sam takes the fall for everything. See. Claire, Jake said. Dad's old girlfriend? Bennett frowned. We haven't been able to locate her. She disappeared right after Kevin Martinez's murder. Because she never left, I said. She's been working with Marcus this whole time. The affair with Sam, the threats, everything, it was all part of their plan. Mom, no. Jake grabbed my arm. You can't meet her. She's the only one who knows where the original evidence is, I said. Without it, Marcus's lawyers will tear this case apart. Sam will walk free, and everything we've been through will mean nothing. Bennett studied me. You're not going alone. Yes, I am. I stood up. Claire won't show if she suspects anything. And I need answers about Sam, about why my mother trusted her with those records. At least we're a wire, Bennett insisted. I shook my head. No recordings. No backup. Just me and the truth. The restaurant was dark when I arrived, its windows boarded up since Kevin's death. Claire stood in the shadows of the entrance, barely changed from the photos in my mother's file. You figured it out, she said as I approached. Faster than we expected.
We.
She smiled. Your mother and I. We've been planning this for 15 years. The world tilted sideways. What? Why do you think she kept such detailed records? Why did she wait until now to reveal everything? Claire stepped closer. She knew what Sam was, what Marcus had done to Kevin. We worked together, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. You were my mother's informant, I whispered. Someone had to protect you. Your mother knew she was dying, knew Sam would never let you go willingly. So we created a trail, knowing someday you'd follow it. The affair with Sam was a way to get close, to gain Marcus's trust.
Claire pulled out a USB drive.
Everything's here, the original files, recordings of Marcus confessing to Jimmy's murder, proof of Sam's involvement from the beginning. Your mother called it her insurance policy. I reached for the drive, but Claire held it back. First, you need to decide, what kind of justice are you looking for? What do you mean? Sam's looking at 20 years minimum. But with this? She held up the drive. He'll never see daylight again. Is that what you want? For Jake to lose his father forever? I thought about Sam's lies, about Jake's pain, about my mother's years of silent preparation, about revenge versus justice, and the thin line between them. I want the truth, I said finally. All of it. Whatever that means for Sam, for all of us. Claire nodded, handing over the drive. Your mother would be proud. She always said you were stronger than you knew. As I took the drive, police lights suddenly flooded the restaurant. Bennett's voice rang out. Claire Anderson, you're under arrest. I looked at Claire in shock, but she was smiling. Did you really think I'd let you come alone? Some truths need witnesses, Morgan. That's what your mother taught me. As Bennett's team moved in, I clutched the drive containing 15 years of carefully gathered truth. Sam's fate, Jake's future, my mother's final justice. All of it resting in my hands. Now I just had to decide what to do with it. 6 months after Sam's arrest, I sat beside Walter's hospital bed, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of consciousness. Jake dozed in a chair nearby, research papers spread across his lap. He'd transferred to a local college to be closer to us, though he insisted it was just for better internship opportunities. The USB drive from Claire had changed everything, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of using all the evidence, I'd made a different choice. I gave prosecutors enough to convict Marcus and his organization, but held back the worst of Sam's involvement. 10 years instead of life. A chance for redemption instead of destruction. You're thinking too loud, Walter mumbled, his eyes fluttering open. Just wondering if I made the right choice, I said softly. About Sam? He squeezed my hand weakly. You chose mercy. That's never wrong. Jake stirred, looking up from his papers. Grandpa's right. Dad's letters from prison. He's different now. Actually talking about things, not just manipulating. The latest letter sat in my purse unopened. Sam wrote every week, each envelope containing a piece of truth he'd never shared before. Small confessions, genuine regrets, memories of moments when our love had been real despite its fraudulent beginnings. Claire's testimony at the sentencing, Jake continued, about how Mom planned everything. I keep thinking about that. How she protected us even after she was gone. She protected you, Walter corrected. Morgan was just the weapon she chose. A knock at the door interrupted us. Detective Bennett stood there, holding a familiar-looking envelope. This came to the station today, from Claire's personal effects. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before, my mother and Claire sitting in Kevin's restaurant, both smiling. On the back, my mother's handwriting. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of revenge. There's something else, Bennett said, pulling out a document. Claire's confession. She admitted to killing Kevin Martinez herself to protect your mother. He wasn't just threatening to expose the operation, he was threatening to reveal your mother's role as an informant. The truth settled over me like a heavy blanket. My mother hadn't just been gathering evidence, she'd been protecting her own secrets, her own sins. The perfect justice I'd been seeking had never existed. What are you going to do? Jake asked. I looked at the confession, then at Walter's tired face, at Jake's concerned eyes. Nothing, I said finally. Some truths don't need to be told. Some debts don't need to be collected. Walter nodded, understanding in his gaze. Like mother, like daughter. Speaking of debts, Bennett added, Marcus's assets have been seized. The court awarded restitution to his victims, including the money Walter borrowed 15 years ago. Jake sat up straighter. So the house is yours, Bennett smiled at Walter. Free and clear. Walter's eyes filled with tears. I never thought. I did, I said, squeezing his hand. Mom did too. That's why she kept fighting. Later that evening, as Jake drove us home from the hospital, he asked the question I'd been expecting. Are you going to visit Dad? Soon, I said, watching the familiar streets pass by. When I'm ready to hear the whole truth. When we're both ready to build something real from all these lies. At home, I finally opened Sam's latest letter. Inside was a single sentence. I loved you most when I deserved you least. I thought about my mother's final message, about Claire's sacrifice, about Walter's forgiveness and Jake's resilience, about how revenge and justice sometimes look exactly like mercy. Tomorrow I would visit Sam, not to condemn or forgive, but to understand, to see if anything true could grow in the space between revenge and redemption. But tonight, I sat on my father's porch with my son, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors my mother would have loved. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in winning the fight, but in choosing which battles to let go. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough.